These videos were created for you to watch along. They'll teach you about client track so you know what's going on. So best of luck with all of your data. Now here's your HMIS system administrator.
In this training video, we'll be going over how to do an intake within ClientTrack. Doing an intake is how we initially enroll a client into one of our projects. And so after logging into ClientTrack, we'll want to go ahead and navigate over to the Clients tab. And this next step I'm going to walk us through is actually a very important step. Because this is a shared database, there's a good chance that the client you're trying to enroll might already exist within the system. And so we don't want to create a duplicate client record, but instead we want to do a proper search to see if this person exists in the system and then enroll that client record. To search for a client, we want to click on the Find Client icon here in the top left. And the first thing we'd want to search by is Social Security number. Reason why we'd want to search by Social Security number first is, in theory, there should only be one client tied to one Social Security number, and so this would be a quick way to pull up a client. So here, if you were able to see the client you were looking for, and you can verify that by name and birth date as well, you would go ahead and click on that client and it would pull up that record. However, if you do not see the client you are looking for here, we don't want to stop at this step, but we want to search a little further. So the next step we'd want to search by is birth date. But first we would want to delete the Social Security number here. Now the reason we'd want to do that is if I go type in a birth date here and hit search, I might not get any results, but that might be because I'm also now looking at birth date and Social Security number. So a way to kind of think about this is if you're used to doing Google searches, sometimes the more you type in the better because it's going to look at all possible matches. This form, however, is a very specific search, and so it's going to make sure everything here matches on that client record. So the more information you type in on this screen to do a search, then the more things it's going to make sure that client record has to match. So for instance, if I delete the Social Security number here and just search by birth date, we can see there's actually 5 different people that do match this birth date. So again, we want to search by social first, then if we don't find the person, delete social and just search by birth date. And then of course here, if we see our client, we'd be able to go ahead and click on them. If we still don't see our client, it would be recommended that you do a search by name. Reason we'd want to do this is in case maybe they have been keyed in already, but there was a digit off on the Social Security number, so we could still say, it's the same person, but the person that keyed it in got the Social Security number slightly wrong and maybe the birth date slightly wrong. So you can search here using first name, last name. You can also do partial name searches. So for instance, if there's a name that might have a common misspelling, you can type in part of the name and it will still search by that as well. So here you can see these are possible matches that match what I typed in here on first and last name. And then of course going by Social Security number and birth date will allow you to verify if this in fact is one of the people you were trying to pull up. So once we find our person, we would go ahead and just click on them. Once we've done a proper search for a client and either pulled up that client record or determined that that client does not already exist in the system, we would want to go ahead and click on a project intake button to start the process of doing an actual intake. So you'll note here that there's actually 2 buttons here. There's one that just says project intake and one that says RHY project data intake. This RHY stands for Runaway Homeless Youth, and this would just be used for a project that is specifically under the RHY grant. Also to note, if you are a street outreach project, you will actually want to navigate to a different work group. So if we click on our name up here in the top right, we can change work groups to street outreach, hit apply, and now you'll note this button turns into street outreach intake. So if you are enrolling someone into a street outreach project, you would want to use that option. Everyone else would want to be under HMIS programs. And then for RI projects, you would use this intake, but everyone else you want to use the standard project intake. So I'm going to go ahead and click on project intake. Now if we had previously been able to pull up the client that already exists in the system, and we can see that information right here, we would just click on use the current client, and that's going to go ahead and let us enroll that client into our project. This will pull up the information that's already being keyed in for this client and give you an opportunity to edit that before we go on. So if you're on this screen, definitely recommend looking over this information, making sure it's correct. If you notice the birth dates, a day off, or the social security numbers, a digit off, names misspelled, whatever, like you would go ahead and correct that information on here or any of the other client demographics. And then you would go ahead and click finish, and that would go ahead and let you continue the intake process. However, for training, we're going to say that the person that we're trying to key in, we were not able to find them. We were not able to pull them up at all. And so we'd still go ahead and do the same process of project intake, but instead of using the current client option here, we're going to say add a new client. It's still going to walk us through this search existing clients form as just kind of a fail-safe in case this person does exist but we did not search for them properly. So here we'd go ahead and type in, just typing their first and last name is fine here. And also when keying in somebody, the name we'd want to use as far as for recording them, not when we're doing that first search under find client, like I said, you can use partial name searches. Here we want to make sure we use their full name, and we also want to make sure this is their legal name. We don't want to use nicknames or anything like that here, because if we do that, it's going to be then hard for the next agency that goes to try to enroll that client. They might use their legal name, and if we've used their nickname, then it's not potentially going to pull up that client. So we always want to use, if everybody uses the legal name, that's going to be the best situation to make sure we don't create duplicate clients in the system. And this process here is just going to walk you through recording all the client demographics for the person. So something to note here is some fields are going to have asterisks, so that means it is required information. So middle name, for instance, is not required, but you can type in the middle name here if that's something that would be helpful for your project or your agency. You can totally do that here. And there's also some fields that auto-populate. So for instance, name quality here, because I typed in a first name and last name, it automatically marked it as full name reported. So we'd want to go ahead and continue to type in information here. Now in all these fields, or a lot of these fields, there will be a quality field here. And so for instance, here is social security number. If I go ahead and type in that social security number in full and then go to the next thing, it's actually going to make that field disappear because it knows I did a full social security number. Birth date, some of these are kind of the same way. The way these work here though is you have some of these will say like full date of birth reported, so that's if we know their birth date, we will change it to that. And as far as putting dates in, you can either just type them in like this. It'll auto calculate their age. You can use dashes when you type it in, either way. You can also pull up the little calendar icon, which lets you select different months, different years. If you hold down the mouse, it'll pull up the months here, and then you can go ahead and click on the right one. And then you can see here it automatically defaulted to full date of birth reported. If, for instance, you did not have the full date of birth, maybe you just know the year they were born, then you would type the date in here, such as 11, and you could do approximate to let the system know that all we know is the approximate date. This isn't their actual. And then you'll also see fields such as client doesn't know. If a client says they don't know that information, client refused if a client just says, they don't want to share that information. And then finally, data not collected. Data not collected would be the one you really don't want to use. That would mean that information, you just did not capture that information for whatever reason. And so we really want to, not ever have to use that. But however, if for whatever reason that information was not captured, when you initially enrolled that client or when you got that information from them, then that field is there to be able to be used. We'll go ahead and continue. Ethnicity. Also throughout Client Track, you'll notice these little help icons. If you hover over those have some helpful tidbits of information. Disabling condition, for instance, if I hover over that one, it's actually got some stuff straight from the HUD Data Standards Manual. So this can be some great reminders if you are, saying, what does HUD mean when they say disabling condition? You can find that information there. Continuing on with race, this is a multiple select box, so you can actually select however many races are appropriate for that client. We'll go ahead and continue here. We'll note here sexual orientation for this particular enrollment is not required, so we can skip that. If we would like to record the address, contact information for the client, we can do that. It's not required for this particular enrollment, but if we put a check mark by there, we can see that now we can type in an address, email, home phone, and so forth. Now, something to note throughout this intake, based on what project we are enrolling somebody to, is going to determine the particular questions that come up and also what questions are required. So that's just something to note, that while you're doing the intake, if you are noticing there are things that are being required that for a fact are not required for your project type, then you need to either get with a COC admin or submit an issue in Client Track so we can look at your project setup. And that also goes for if you do an intake on somebody and you notice it's not asking all the questions that for a fact are required. Again, that could point to your project might not be set up right. And so you want to submit an issue on that so we can get that corrected. So continuing on here, this last step here, we can actually leave this family totally blank, and then relationship head of household would be self, because when doing a intake, we always want to start with the head of household. So that's something to consider if you're doing a family. Always start with whoever is considered the head of household, and that's what this represents here, that they are self, they are the head of household. So at this point we'd go ahead and click finish. And what's happened here, and you can also follow this throughout the steps right here, and this is basically, so this is what's called in Client Track a workflow, and what this is doing is, instead of us going and doing individual steps and then having to go click and figure out where we need to go next, this is going to walk us through this workflow, and it's automatically going to capture all the information we need a step at a time. And what we've done at this point is we've already created that client record. So here you can see this client record exists in the system now. It has a client ID right here. This is an individual number that every client is assigned. And even if we did not do anything else here, this client record would exist in the system. Now, we haven't enrolled them into our project, so they're not really associated with us or our agency, but they do exist in the system. And this step here, family members, this is where we would add any family members that the client might have. Something to note on this form is, one, if this was a record that already existed within the system, they might have family members connected here, that we might not be particularly enrolling into our project. So maybe somebody had their entire family that was enrolled into a family shelter a couple years ago, and so when we get to this screen, we see, the head of household along with a bunch of other family members. But maybe now we're just working with that particular head of household. Maybe we're just a individual emergency shelter. It's totally fine that multiple family members are listed here, because on the next form you're going to see you actually have an opportunity to choose which clients you are actually enrolling. So that being said, here on this form here, if you see a bunch of people and you're like, oh, well, we're not enrolling all of them, do I need to delete them, or what do I need to do? It's totally fine to leave them on here. Like I said, the next screen is going to allow you to choose which ones you are actually enrolling. But we do want to make sure on this screen that any family members we are enrolling together, and this does mean someone that they are going to be residing with now. So if someone has a family that maybe they're not with right now and they're just coming into our project by themselves, we don't have to go in and make sure to add them. We can just add the ones that we are going to be working with here. And so for training purposes, I'll go ahead and add a family member just so we can see what that looks like. So I'm going to type in the first name, last name. When I go to another field here, it's going to automatically do a little pop-up box, which is what it's doing is it's searching this client name that I just keyed in to see if maybe they already exist in the system. So maybe they've been tied to another family at some point or something like that. Based on social security number and birth date, you would be able to quickly see if this person already exists or not. And if they don't, you would go ahead and click cancel, and it's going to allow us then to continue on creating a new client file for this person. And then we would go ahead and type in the same information that we did for this head of household. Actually, I'll make this person a child. And then based on if a person is adult or child will also dictate what questions are asked. So we'll see that in just a moment. We'll go ahead and type in information here. We'll actually see, okay, so relationship head of household, here's where we will key in that. Disabling condition. You'll actually note there's not a veteran status for this because it knows the person is under 18. And then it does default race to the head of household's race. However, we can go ahead and change that. So if that would be different, we can click here and then select the appropriate ones. Click the little check box here, and then that would allow us to change that. Also, if you get on this screen, it's a pre-existing client, you might run into an issue where everyone's listed as head of household. That was just an issue with some of the migrated clients. What you'd want to do here is actually, if that's the case, if you have multiple clients listed here and they all say self, you would actually change them all to something that is not self. You'd click save, and then you would go ahead and change the appropriate one to self. And then this would allow you to go ahead and click save and close, which will let us continue in our process. So this page is where we actually enroll the clients into the program. So here you'll see a list of any programs that you have associated with your project. So I'm going to go ahead and choose one here. And here's where you're going to see any of those family members listed. And all you do is put a check mark by the ones that you want to enroll. So again, if you see a whole list here, and some of those people are not people you're going to be working with, don't put a check mark by them. Just put a check mark by the ones that you are enrolling. project date here, we want to make sure this is the actual date that you are enrolling them into your project. So if you maybe recorded things on paper a week ago, but now you're keying it into the system, then we'd want to make sure to backdate this to the proper date. It's automatically going to put you as a case manager. However, if you need to, you can click these magnifying glasses to change this. If maybe you're doing the intake, but someone else is actually going to be the case manager. And then here it also gives you another opportunity to record the relationship to head of household. And so the reason why that's important is on each project intake, it's going to, after selecting program, it's going to ask this. And so if someone previously recorded this family and there was maybe a different person that was head of household, here it's still going to allow you to record what this situation is for your project. So maybe you have two different emergency shelters, for instance. One is one that just does women and children, one just does men. When you do the project intake here and we say we're enrolling just the man by himself, then we would just enroll him, mark him as self. Then later on, when we go to do a whole nother intake on the woman and children, then we would just select the woman and the children here, and then we would actually select her as self. And so this gives you flexibility of having kind of different makeups of each family makeups of per project level. Also, you'll notice restrictions listed here throughout ClientTrack. Depending on if your agency is considered protected or not, and that's something that's kind of set up in the back end, it's going to either default to restrict to organization or restrict to MOU, which restrict to MOU is going to mean it's potentially shared that other agencies would be able to see that information. Also, you'll note here, date of move-in date, that's not required here because of this project type. This would be something if it's rapid rehousing, or in the future, all permanent housing projects will have dates here. And so you'll note that one is going to be when the person enrolls into the project, and then one's going to be when they actually get housed. And we're going to go ahead and click Save here. At this point, this goes ahead and creates the client record. Actually creates the enrollment for the client record. Now, an error you might run into on this program enrollment page is if this person was already enrolled into another residential project, you might get a little error message here that says this person's already enrolled in, and it would list the name of the project and the agency there. ClientTrack will not let you enroll someone into two residential projects at the same time because it's impossible for someone to, actually be staying at two different places. And so if you ever get a message like that, you would want to contact that agency that they are still enrolled at, because obviously they need to go in and exit that person from that enrollment. If they are no longer there, then that would allow you to go ahead and enroll them into your residential project. If you ever have a hard time getting in touch with a agency for them to correct that information, you can also always submit an issue on that, and then we can figure out getting in touch with them and making that work. So we're going to go ahead and continue on here. This is where we get into the assessment questions, and it's going to ask all those individual questions and kind of associate them though with that enrollment. So here, the first question that's not filled out, housing status, is not required, so we don't have to do that. Client location here, this is not where the client used to live or anything like that. This is where you are servicing this client. And so the purpose of this question would be for projects that serve more than one COC, have different locations. You'd be able to select the appropriate location here. Type of residence, this is all where the client stayed the night before. So we'd want to go ahead and do that information here. Based on what you answer here is going to depend on these following questions. So if I do emergency shelter versus institutional, it's going to change up things a little bit here. And so we just want to go through this in order. For instance, under type of residence here, if I do nursing home, it's going to say, well, did you stay less than 90 days? If I choose yes, it's going to then go ahead and say, well, exactly how long did you stay? And then it's going to say on the night before, so this is talking about the night before they were at the nursing home, were they in fact on the streets or emergency shelter or safe haven? And then you would choose yes or no. If you choose no, that's going to be the end of that. If you choose yes, then it's going to pop up, well, what is the approximate date homelessness started? And also follow-up questions of, well, regardless of where they stayed, how many times have they been homeless in the last 3 years, and so forth. And so these can be some kind of hard to answer questions. This is really where you get into a conversation with the client and trying to get the most appropriate answers for this. And so very important information. This is also where it's calculated if someone is chronically homeless or not. So again, we want to make sure that we capture the most appropriate, accurate information here, if possible. Realizing, though, that some of this is going to be approximate because, a lot of people aren't going to know exactly the day that they became homeless. Also, something to note, throughout ClientTrack, if there is information you do not record that's required, it will not let you continue on. So if I hit save, you'll see here there's some information that I did not capture. And if I actually click on there, it will take me directly to that. If I was hovered up here, for instance, if I click here, it's going to hover down here and let me know where I need to record this information. Health insurance, yes or no. If I choose yes, then it's going to make me go ahead and choose one of these particular ones to be yes. If I choose no, it changes them all to no. So we want to just make sure we are asking the client if they're getting any of these for health insurances. Go ahead and save here. And as we do this again, we are seeing all the different steps laid out here through the workflow. If we're in the middle of a workflow and maybe we need to pull up a different client for whatever reason, or maybe we're going to lunch, we're not going to be able to continue this, you can actually pause workflows. If we hit pause here, it's going to pause the workflow. You'll get a little thing here that says OK, and it takes you out of that workflow. To resume that workflow later on, you can just click paused workflows. It'll give you a list of any paused workflows you have. Click the little blue arrow beside it and hit resume. Now, this information, even if we were to cancel the workflow, this is, as we're going through these steps, it is going to save all the information as we go. And so there's not going to be anything that gets deleted, if we cancel the workflow. But however, to make sure we get all this information recorded, we want to continue all the way through the workflow, and that's going to make sure we don't miss anything. So for barriers, HUD requires that every barrier have at least a yes or no for all these. The quickest way to do this screen is if you click this box, it'll mark them all as no, and then you can mark the appropriate ones as yes. And if you choose yes, it'll also require you to record this information here. You got a little explanation thing here. This is not required, but some people will use this to do a little clarification of maybe exactly what is this chronic health condition that this person is recording. This is something that will always be default to restrict organization, so this is something that will not be shared with other agencies. Continuing on, domestic violence, and then continuing on for income. So there's going to be 2 required questions here. income from any source, or non-cash benefits from any source. If we just choose no here, we'd be able to do save and close. If we choose yes here, it's actually then going to automatically pop up those possible options. So I'm going to choose yes here on both of these. Expenses is not required, so you'll see no asterisk here. And then you will note you have all your different options here for income and also all your different options for non-cash. It will make you select at least one of these because we chose yes on here. And then it will also make you for any of these up here, because these will have a dollar amount. You will want ahead and put a dollar amount here. For earned income, it's a good idea to go ahead and type in the description of where this person is working, how they're getting that money. And then for these, you can just type in the value. There's not really anything in the description necessarily you'd want to record here. And then these are the non-cash benefits. And you do want to make sure you are, when you're doing an intake, you're asking each client if they are receiving any of these benefits. You don't want to just say, well, do you get any non-cash benefits? They might not think of food stamps as non-cash benefits. So you want to kind of go through these one at a time, just asking if the client gets any of these. Once we record that, we will go ahead and click save and close. And we actually see finish here. So I always tell people, if you can get to the finish, if you see finish and can click on that, you can pretty much guarantee yourself that you have answered all the questions and gone through all the assessment questions that you needed to. You can also back into things by clicking on the things here. This is how you go back if you needed to. Say you had done assessment and then realized, oh, I did that wrong. You can navigate back through here. Is how you do that. And then also, if we had enrolled both family members, then this stage here, instead of getting finished, we would automatically switch over to the other family member, and you'd see this information change here, and then it would walk you through capturing any information for those family members. And again, based on the age and whether they're head of household or not, it's going to only ask you the questions that are required for that particular client, saving you a lot of time by not having to type in information that you don't have to. Once you click finish, it goes ahead and takes you to the client dashboard. And here we can see we have an enrollment for our client, for our agency that we were logged into. We can see that they have an enroll date here. And then we can also see there is one case member. So this would give you a heads up if you had meant to enroll the entire family, but you only see one case member here, that there's a problem. So that is an intake in a nutshell. Hopefully that filled you in on doing an intake. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to submit a ticket by clicking up help on the top right here.